According to JSTOR.gov, for every controller there are 32 aircraft flying at one time. I'm Chris Palacio, and today I'm going to take you on a plane ride to tell you about air traffic control. And this is going to include the tower and the ROTCON, otherwise known as the radar approach control. We will start off at the terminal, we'll move into the plane, and as we start to taxi out, we'll hit the runway, we'll take off, we'll level off en route, we will arrive, land, and taxi in again. So before we start our flight, I'll tell you about the basics of air traffic control. First, we'll start off with training. Training can vary, but most of the time it will be 6 months plus in classroom environment, including simulators. And then you will go to wherever you're going to start controlling at. And from there on, you have on-the-job training. And this can take anywhere between 6-7 months up to 2 years of training. In training, we have something we like to call the Air Traffic Control Bible. And this is something that we use from the beginning of our careers to the very end. And this is the FAA Order 7110.65. And any and all specifications I state today will come out of this reg or the Aeronautical Information Manual. Air traffic control's main duty is to keep aircraft separated and to issue safety alerts. That's what we do. There's two types of aircraft. There are VFR, which is visual flight rules, and air traffic control separates them but doesn't separate them. These visual flight rules are a condition where the aircraft can get as close as they want as long as they don't touch. All air traffic control does is issue safety advisories. And then there's IFR. IFR is a different case. It's instrument flight rules. These pilots are using strictly instruments. These are going to be most of your commercial flights, like the example I'm going to use today. This is a little bit more where air traffic control steps in. We keep 1,000-foot separation vertically from these aircraft, and we will keep 3 miles laterally from these aircraft. And that's how separated they'll stay at all times. And then the last thing you need to know is airspace. The way we like to brief airspace is think of a wedding cake. You have your big layer on the bottom, you have your medium layer in the middle, and then you have your smallest layer on top. Now, you flip that upside down, you have tower's airspace, you have an approach controls airspace, and you have an en route airspace up top. And that's how we like to brief airspace. So now let's begin our flight. Our flight starts off with you in the terminal. And say you're in the terminal and you're getting called to the plane, everybody's walking on. Well, while all this is going on, in the background, your pilot is talking to a clearance delivery controller. This is the first air traffic controller you're going to experience. Now, the pilot is talking to clearance, and clearance is giving them exactly that, a clearance, saying you can leave from one airport and arrive to another airport by going a certain route. So the pilot gets done talking to his clearance delivery controller. Now is where we move up into the tower. In the tower, there's the ground control. Ground control is the controller that coordinates all ground movement. This includes any vehicles and all the planes taxiing into the runway. So but you're back on the plane, you're sitting down, you start to fill the plane back up. Now you fill the plane, taxiing to the runway. That's because the ground controller has given your plane a clearance to go from his parking spot to the runway in whatever order it needs to be. Now, as you feel yourself slowing down and you can see the runway in sight as you're looking out the window, your pilot is now moving from the ground controller to a local controller. Now, the local controller is the controller that coordinates and sequences all aircraft landing on the runway and departing. And most of the time we use a zipper effect. For every couple that land, we depart a couple. So now that's what your pilot's doing. And the local controller has now cleared you for takeoff. So you feel yourself rolling out onto the runway. You sit there for a second, and now you start departing. Well, as you're departing, you're not done talking to controllers. Now we're going to move on into the RAPCON. And the RAPCON has a departure controller. This is who your pilot is talking to now. And the departure controller is the controller that tells the pilot that you are pretty much cleared on course, saying you can go in the direction you need to go now. And he also will assign an initial altitude. So, say your aircraft is requesting to fly to 23,000 feet. Your departure controller will say, hey, climb to 9,000 feet. And as that's happening, your departure controller will tell your pilot to contact an en route controller. Now the en route controller is the pilot, or the controller is going to tell your pilot, hey, go from 9,000 feet all the way up to your requested altitude of 23,000 feet. So you're climbing, you're leveling off. Now you're in the en route phase of flight. Now your controllers are all just stacking up their planes, going where they need to go, keeping them separated. And this is all in the RAPCON. Now it's time for your arrival controller. So your en route controller says, hey, descend and maintain 10,000 feet. So as your plane descends, your en route controller is now saying, contact arrival control. Now arrival control will pick up, start talking to your pilot. And your arrival controller is going to say, descend and maintain 5,000 feet. So now your plane descends at 5,000 feet. This is usually when your pilot comes on and says, we're beginning our descent, or we've been in our descent, we're expected to land here at whatever your destination of airport is, and this is what the weather is. So as you're arriving, the arrival controller is actually taking your airplane with a bunch of other airplanes and setting you up in a line. Now as you're being set up into a line, your arrival controller is going to set you up with the runway as well. And usually they'll use an instrument approach. So if you imagine an imaginary line, the arrivals controller job is to take your plane and stick him on that line. So now your plane is following down this line, you have the runway in sight. Now what's going to happen is you're going to go back to the tower. What arrival's going to do is going to say, hey, contact tower control. So now you're talking local again. Local, like I said, is the one that's sequencing all arrivals and departures. And so now you're landing, and now your local controller is telling you where to land and when to land. And so now you're hitting the runway, and you're on your rollout. And then you start to feel yourself turn off the runway. As that's happening, your local controller is now telling your pilot to contact a ground control again. And now your ground controller, like I said, is sequencing all your ground movement. So now your ground movement is you taxiing in while the zipper effect is going on with people taxiing out to the runway. And so now you're boom back into park. And now finally your pilot states, thank you for flying with United Airlines or such and such airlines. And this is pretty much how air traffic control works almost at all times. It's a very routine job. Same thing happens almost every place. There's a couple of other jobs here and there that we won't go into. But this is the basics. And now you know what's going on behind the scenes. Now that you have been through this trip with me, now that you know what the RAPCON does, now you know what the tower does, on your next flight you'll be able to say, hey, I know what the air traffic controller is doing. Now you'll be able to say, hey, I'm talking to a tower controller. I'm talking to a RAPCON controller. And you'll be able to impress all your friends that are out beside you. Thank you for listening. I'm Chris Palacio.